My children thought I was a betrayer until I sent them the truth. In the hush of a nearly empty chapel, a mother stands alone with a heavy heart, eyes fixed on two empty chairs meant for her children. Years of silent sacrifice echo in the quiet. The secrets she carried to protect them now weigh on her heart. She once shielded them from their father's darkness, yet on her day of hope, they've chosen his side. Her soul trembles on the threshold of joy and sorrow as she's forced to face a painful line she never wanted to draw. She remembers the beginning of the unraveling. Her marriage, on the surface, had always looked normal, perhaps even happy. A husband who smiled in public, who played the part of a doting father, who kissed his children goodnight and made jokes at the dinner table. But behind closed doors, he was a different man, distant, controlling, dismissive. The kind of cold that didn't shout, but froze the heart over time. He never hit her. That would have been easier to explain. Instead, he wore her down with silence, guilt, and the subtle art of making her feel invisible. She endured it for years, not out of love, but for her children. She told herself it was enough that he was a good father, even if he was a terrible husband. But even that illusion started to crack when his emotional instability began seeping into their home life. Mood swings, periods of withdrawal, nights where he'd disappear for hours and come home smelling of alcohol and regret. When she finally filed for divorce, her oldest was just 14, the youngest only 10. She had imagined tears, confusion, maybe even anger, but nothing prepared her for the weaponized heartbreak her children would aim at her. "Why are you doing this to Dad?" they cried. "You ruined everything." No matter how gently she tried to explain, no matter how much she reassured them, they only saw one thing: Dad, broken. And in their eyes, she was the one who broke him. They didn't see the years she cried alone in the bathroom. They didn't hear the nights he didn't come home, the mornings he barely acknowledged her. They didn't know how long she'd stayed for their sake. To them, she was the destroyer, and he the victim. After the divorce, things only got worse. Her ex spiraled again. He unraveled in front of the kids, using their sympathy like a shield. He became the tragic figure in their lives, the man who couldn't move on because their mother had given up. It didn't matter that he refused therapy. It didn't matter that she kept her dating life private for fear of hurting them further. Every time she tried to rebuild, he found a way to crumble again, and the children blamed her for every piece that fell. She sent them to therapy, desperate to help them untangle the mess he'd left behind. Some of it worked for a while, but then they turned 18, and one by one they stopped going. Her middle child wouldn't even speak during sessions, and so eventually she stopped fighting. She kept her heart guarded, her hopes quiet, her joy under wraps, all to preserve the fragile illusion that one day they'd see her side. But time only hardened their beliefs. And now, standing at the edge of what should be her new beginning, she stares at the evidence of what her silence has cost her: empty chairs, and a heart that's breaking in a brand new way. She didn't choose loneliness, it was handed to her, wrapped in guilt and quiet shame. After the divorce, she had hoped that with time, the children would come to understand. That maybe, as they grew older, they would start to see what she had endured. But years passed, and the silence between them only grew heavier, sharper. Every smile she allowed herself was met with suspicion. Every step toward healing felt like a betrayal in their eyes, so she learned to disappear from her own life. Dating became a guilty secret, something hidden like contraband, while other women her age posted photos of wine dates, anniversaries, and hand-holding under sunset skies. She kept her joy behind a locked door. No social media, no sleepovers when the kids were home, no signs that she might, God forbid, move on. She laughed softly at dinners, swallowed affection like pills, and offered nothing of her heart when her children were near. Not because she was ashamed of loving again, but because she was terrified of losing what little love she still had from them. Her children had become the emotional gatekeepers of her life, and she didn't even realize it until it was too late. Each time she tried to open up, even gently, their faces would darken. "How do you think Dad will feel?" they'd ask. Not "how do you feel?" Not "are you happy?" Always Dad, always him. Her ex-husband lingered like a ghost in their shared conversations. He didn't need to be present to haunt her. His pain did it for him. He had become a permanent victim in their narrative, and she the cold-hearted villain, The woman who abandoned their family, the one who moved on too fast, smiled too easily, dared to live. It didn't matter that she stayed single for years, that she sacrificed parts of herself no one ever asked about, that she never introduced a single man to her children. The moment they discovered she was seeing someone again, years after the divorce, her ex unraveled in familiar, terrifying ways: late night phone calls, emotional blackmail, passive aggressive posts, and once again the kids blamed her for his collapse. So she pulled back, like always, toned herself down, softened the joy in her voice, hid the man who brought her flowers and treated her gently, kept his name a secret, not because she didn't love him, but because she knew the cost of being seen. And still, they looked at her with cold disappointment, like she had betrayed something sacred. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come from losing someone, but from knowing they were never truly on your side. And in the quiet moments when the world went still, she began to wonder if her children had ever really seen her, or just the version of her their father painted. Even now, on the brink of her second chance at happiness, she finds herself whispering apologies into the dark. Not to her ex, not to the man waiting at the altar, but to her children, for loving herself enough to want more. And yet, a flicker of something painful but true begins to stir in her chest. Maybe she's done apologizing. It was a quiet afternoon when she gathered the courage to tell them. They were all home for dinner, something that had grown rare in recent years. She had spent the whole day cooking their favorite dishes, not because she believed it would make the news easier, but because she needed something to do with her hands to keep them from trembling. The man she loved had proposed the week before. It wasn't grand, no fireworks, just a quiet question asked with eyes that saw her, really saw her, for all she was and all she had survived. And she had said yes, not out of desperation, not to prove anything, but because, for the first time in a very long time, she wanted to say yes to herself. She waited until after dessert, when the plates were pushed aside and the room had settled into that familiar warmth she missed so much. Then she told them. Her voice was calm, careful. She braced herself for surprise, maybe some resistance. What she didn't expect was the sudden, sharp silence that dropped like a guillotine between them. Her youngest was the first to speak. "How could you do this to Dad?" The words hit her harder than she thought possible. The ache in her chest wasn't new. It was ancient, worn, and buried deep. But this brought it back to life. She tried to explain, told them she loved them, told them she had waited so long, tried so hard to protect them, to keep things peaceful, that this decision had nothing to do with their father, that it was simply about her. They didn't hear her. They heard betrayal. Voices rose, accusation sharpened. One of them cried, another walked out. They didn't ask who he was or what he was like. They didn't ask if he treated her well. All they could see was a wound they believed she was tearing open again. In the days that followed, she clung to hope. She thought maybe the dust would settle, the emotions would soften, they'd come around. But then came the text. 3 short messages, one from each child, unified in cold clarity. "We will not be attending your wedding. We need to support Dad during this time." Her hands trembled as she read it, not because she was shocked they had made their position painfully clear, but because a piece of her had still believed in their love, still believed that maybe, just maybe, she mattered too. She sat alone in her kitchen that night, staring at the words glowing on her phone. The room felt colder than usual, too big, too empty. And then something in her cracked. She picked up her phone and typed, fingers steady now, voice quiet but unyielding. "If you choose not to stand beside me on the most important day of my life, know that I will not stand beside you on yours." It wasn't revenge, it wasn't anger. It was grief speaking its final truth, that love cannot survive forever on sacrifice alone. She hadn't meant it as a threat. The words she sent weren't born from cruelty, but from exhaustion. A line had to be drawn finally, painfully, before there was nothing left of her. For years she had bent over backward to keep the peace, to earn a kind word, to be seen not as the villain, but simply as a mother who still loved her children. But they had made their choice, loud and clear, and now she had to make hers. The silence that followed her message was suffocating. Days passed. No calls, no apologies, no explanations. Only a cold stillness, like winter had crept into her chest and settled there. She checked her phone more often than she'd admit, hoping for even a single message, a question, a pause, a sign that they understood even a little, but nothing came. What did come eventually was anger, not hers, theirs. A storm of words pouring in like acid rain, accusations that she was manipulative, that she was emotionally blackmailing them, that she was punishing them for having loyalty to their father, that she was making her wedding about herself. She stared at the text, heart thudding, breath shallow. Of course it was about her, she wanted to scream. It's my wedding. But what hurt most wasn't their refusal to come, it was their absolute refusal to see her, not as a villain, not as a martyr, just as a woman, fragile, wounded, but still standing, still hoping. And in that moment, she realized something bitter but freeing. She could no longer keep begging for space in hearts that had already locked her out. So she did the unthinkable. She told them the truth, all of it, the things she had shielded them from for over a decade, the emotional manipulation, the nights he vanished, the nights she cried on the floor while they slept soundly in the next room, the truth hidden behind their father's sad eyes and broken demeanor, the screenshots, the court documents, the therapist's notes. She sent them all, not to smear him, not to hurt them, but because finally she chose herself. She chose truth over silence, and their reply shattered what little hope remained. You're lying. We don't want to hear this. You're trying to turn us against Dad? She felt it then, something break, not just in her heart, but deep in her spirit. A thread that had held her together for so long quietly snapped, not with rage, not with tears, but with the dull ache of understanding. They weren't ready to see her. Maybe they never would be. And for the first time, she let go, not in bitterness, not in defeat, but in peace. Because after all the silence, all the sacrifice, all the years of swallowing her truth, she had finally spoken it. Whether they chose to listen was no longer her burden to carry. The morning of the wedding was quiet, too quiet, no chaos of laughter or make-up brushes, no clinking of glasses or excited chatter, just the rustle of her dress and the distant hum of the city outside her window. In the silence, she looked at herself in the mirror, really looked. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same person who had once knelt on a bathroom floor, praying her children would still love her if they ever found out the truth. No, this woman was tired. Tired, yes, but she was also free. In the days leading up to the ceremony, after that final message from her children, she had cried. Of course she had. Grief doesn't disappear just because you finally decide to stop carrying it. But something had shifted deep inside her, like a river that had finally broken its dam. The ache was still there, but now it had room to move, to flow, to pass. She walked herself down the aisle. There was no father to give her away, no children to hold her hand, just a soft piano melody, a few close friends, and the man at the end of the aisle who had waited for her, not just today, but through years of silence, hesitation, and fear. He smiled at her with a kind of pride that made her throat tighten. Not because she was perfect, not because she had it all together, but because, despite everything, she was here. And she had chosen herself. When the vows were spoken, there were no grand declarations, no dramatic promises, just quiet truths, gentle hands, and two people who understood that healing didn't come with fanfare. It came with choosing joy, over and over, even when it hurt. That night, after the last toast had been made and the final dance had ended, she sat alone for a moment on the edge of the reception hall, her dress slightly wrinkled, her hair loosened. She looked at the empty chairs where her children should have been. A fresh wave of grief rose, but it was softer now, less suffocating, like a memory of pain, not its presence. She could have reached out again, sent another message, apologized for choosing her own life, but what would that change? They weren't ready. And maybe, just maybe, their journey wasn't hers to carry anymore. She had always believed that motherhood meant selflessness, that to be a good mother, you had to give until you were empty. But now, for the first time, she wondered if maybe the most radical act of motherhood was teaching your children that you too are human, that your heart matters, that your needs are not shameful, that love, real love, is not built on silencing yourself to protect someone else's illusion. She would always love them. That truth would never change, but she no longer needed to chase their love at the cost of her own soul. As she looked out the window, the city glowing quietly beneath the night sky, she whispered, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in peace. I release you, and I return to myself. And for the first time in years, her heart felt still, not because everything was perfect, but because she had stopped waiting for others to choose her. She had finally chosen herself.